Thank you for joining us this evening. We are presenting Letters to Sala, a Holocaust commemoration for Yom Hashoah, with Kirshner, Jill Vexler, and several special guests. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. Without further ado, Kirshner.
Good evening. I'm Ann Kirshner, and welcome to this special Yom Hashoah commemoration. On this night, I suspect many of us would have been out and about, perhaps at a synagogue or a community center or some sort of gathering place to commemorate Yom Hashoah, but of course, none of us are attending in-person commemorations this year. I got an email yesterday from a friend of mine, and I'd like to read you what she said. I'm not sure, she writes, if the coronavirus will increase or decrease interest in Holocaust commemoration. We should be inspired by the stories of resilience and overcoming much worse conditions than those we are suffering through. But many of us were hoping just for a good life with no troubles. My friend's right, of course. And yet, history has its own calendar. History has its own demands, even though sometimes those are so inconvenient and difficult to live up to. I find tonight incredibly poignant, not only because of COVID and these circumstances, isolation that we're in, and yet we need community more than ever. It's also a time when we are losing the survivors, our best teachers. My mother, Sala, was my best teacher, not only about the Holocaust, but about life. And tonight is dedicated to my mother, Sala, and my father, Sidney Kirshner. It's no accident that we just finished commemorating the holiday of Passover. And of course, the story of Passover is one of slavery and liberation. But Passover is also a story about storytelling. We are commanded to retell the story of the Exodus as if we were there, to tell it in our own words, and to engage the next generation, the young people sitting around the table, not this year, but we hoped sitting around the table. And that's very much my inspiration for tonight, to tell my mother's story, but also to recognize that there are so many other stories out there. Thank you very much to those of you who sent in names of family members who perished in the Shoah. We're going to be sharing those names tonight. We're going to be showing a list first of the names that we received. If you don't see your name on this list, don't worry. You can type in the name in the comments section of the video, and then we're going to show that on the screen during the rest of the event. So remember, just click on the video and type in the names that you want us to honor. And we're going to show those names right now.
Yeah, die, da 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 da, yeah, die, da da da, yeah, die, da 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 da, yeah, die, da da da, yeah, die, da da da, yeah, die, da da da. Yeah, die, die, da 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 da. Yeah, die, die, da 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 da. Yeah, die, die, da 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 da. Yeah, die, die, da 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 da. Die, die, da 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 da. Yeah, die, die, da 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 da. Yeah, die, die, da 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 da. Yeah, die, die, da 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 da. Yeah, die, die, da 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 da. Yeah, da die, yeah, da die. Yeah, da die die da die die. Yeah, die die da da die die. Yeah, die die da da die die da da die da da die. Yeah, die die da da die die. Yeah, die die da da die die. Yeah, die die da da die die. Yeah, die da da die. Yeah, da die 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 die.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to honor your loved ones. Let me say thanks also to Congregation Ohat Tzedek and Rabbi Alan Schwartz, to East End Temple, and to the World War II Museum in New Orleans, and to all our friends on all the various social media platforms. You've done so much to make tonight possible. Please, if I can give you one more assignment, if you click share on any of the platforms you're on, it'll help bring more people in tonight. And if you happen to be on Twitter, we're going to be using the hashtag Letters to Sala. Let me now introduce my co-host and friend, Jill Vexler. Jill was the museum curator who first created Letters to Sala at the New York Public Library in our very first exhibition in 2004. We're going to show a picture of her here on the left with my mother, Sala. This picture was taken in the Washington, D.C. exhibition of Letters to Sala. Jill.
Good evening, everyone. It's absolutely one of my favorite photos, which captures, for me, the warmth of the friendship which evolved not only with Sala, but with the whole Garnsash Kirshner family, Weinberg family. Thank you so much. And for asking me to be involved in what is an intimate and yet global story. And thank you to East End Temple for allowing the 3 walls of our social hall to have expanded to a way of storytelling that a few weeks ago I had truly never imagined. In fact, I had a bit of an antipathy to something called an online exhibition until Anne and I realized through her brilliant and talented friends that we could do something much more creative than simply showing kind of boring walls with panels on them, and turn this into a multimedia, multi-platform storytelling evening. That rather than have things on the walls, we are telling the story through the artifacts and live voices out loud, which tell the story. So no do not touch signs, no labels to read, just sit back and enjoy a rich story told by talented and deep storytellers. When I first heard about these letters that were collected in the war, I said, oh yeah, I've seen a few stamps with Hitler on them. I've seen a few envelopes with swastikas, but I never imagined what I would see when Anne Kirshner, whom I met through the Jewish Women's Archive, invited me to her home, and spread out on the dining room table were hundreds of little cards, some letters, mostly small postcards, a few photographs and scraps of paper. And she said, would you like to do an exhibition about this? And my first thought, of course, was yes. But my second thought was, how do you make a visually engaging exhibition when they all kind of look alike? They're small, they're old pieces of paper turning brown, and they're written in a language that most visitors will not be able to read. And thus began the challenge that all curators encounter, which is immersing yourself in the data and in the artifacts, and gifted me with translations in chronological order. And I pored over them for weeks and weeks and learned that while we did not have a direct voice from Sala, we could infer from the letters to Sala what life was like in the ghetto of Sosnowiec and in many different labor camps. But this isn't my introduction to the letters, isn't the beginning. So Anne, why don't you tell everyone how you were introduced to the letters?
It was a fateful day in 1991. Actually, I'll go back a little further than that. There's a picture of my mother and another woman that was always on her night table. This is the picture. There's my mother at around 18 on the right, and there's this woman in a hat gazing into her eyes. Who was this woman? What did she mean to my mother? And I would ask my mother when I was a child, growing up in Jackson Heights in New York City, who was this woman and what did she mean to you? But my mother would never answer my questions. Her eyes would fill with tears. She didn't want to talk about it. And who wants to make their mother cry? And so I stopped asking my questions. All of that ended in 1991. In 1991, my mother was having open heart surgery, and a few days before the surgery was scheduled to happen, she came to visit me and she brought me this box. And she said, "Here, I want you to have this." And I thought, oh, she must be bringing me her jewelry for safekeeping while she's in the hospital. But when I opened the box, what was in it was something like this. This is just a replica. And it was stuffed with these pieces of paper, just the way Jill described them the day that I showed them to her. It's probably hard to imagine that before that day, I knew absolutely nothing about my mother and her experiences in the war, other than that beautiful picture of her and that mysterious woman, Alla. And I knew that she was from Poland, and I knew that she had been in a camp, but where had she been, and what was the name even of her family members, her brothers and sisters? I knew absolutely none of that. So my mother changed my life that day, and the letters became part of my life. And whatever I've done since then, they've come along with me on what is the great journey of my life. And now I'd like to turn you over to my daughter, Caroline, who will tell you the story that I began to learn from my mother, which was my mother's life in Poland before the war.
Hi. So in 1939, the Nazis an industrial town in Poland, Sosnowiec, which is about 100,000 people, one of whom was my grandmother, Sala. She was 15 years old, living in an apartment with 8 people piled into each room with her parents. Her father was a rabbi, Yosef Garnsash, and her mother, Hannah. And she was of 11 siblings, predominantly raised by her oldest sister and Rice. And in 1940, a letter came to the house that said, that asked for one Jewish person to come to the labor camps and serve in a camp. There were no descriptions of what a labor camp was or what they would be doing, but the letter that the Garnsash family got called for my Aunt Reisel. And Reisel was always a little kind of bookish and timid, is the way that she was described to us. Whereas my grandmother, Sala, was much more of a rebel. She was the one who would, play sports with the boys in the yard and sneak out at night to climb on rooftops. And she very confidently was like, "Oh, no, I got this. I'll go instead." And she volunteered to go in place of Reisel. No one really knew what volunteering meant, but she decided to go. And then in October 28th, 1940, she went with her family to the train station to offer parts unknown to have this experience in labor camps. She was told that she'd eventually be able to come home, but that was all they knew. Our knowledge of the story of my grandmother is largely told by these letters that she received. So it's the experience of the war as told by other people. But when we eventually, when we were going through all of her belongings, diary she was in the camps. And the first entry is dated October 28th, 1940, which is how we know exactly when she left. So I'm just going to read a passage of it, which gives you some insight what she's thinking when she left. The opening, she starts talking about her friend who went with her to the train station. If you could have leaped into my heart, you would have seen how desperate I was. I tried that I could. We must go bravely and courageously, even if the heart is breaking. My mistress, I have not mentioned you. I was not looking though I was consumed by you. Sleeping with me, you were begging me, almost yelling at me, that I have what I want to do. What can I say to you? I said nothing. I did not ask you for anything, but I could not stop looking at you, Mother, because I felt something tearing. One more kiss, one more hug, and do not let go of me. Let it end already. This is torture. We are starting to move. Goodbye, everybody. Do not pity me, because nobody forced me. I got what I wanted. God help me. And that was when her through the Holocaust and the camps began. And I'm going to send you to Jill to Sala after she left that tradition.
Almost immediately when she arrived at her first camp, which is Gethlersdorf in Germany. It seemed light years away, but is really just a few hours away from Sosnowiec. She was assigned to work in a sewing machine factory, but in fact, in the labor camp, there weren't enough machines. And so she was sent to a family near Gaversdorf labor camp, the Pache family. They took her in like a daughter. They too were tailors. They made sure she had enough food. They gave her an extra blanket during the winter. And how do we know this? Because we don't have Sala's voice. We know it from the letters. By reading and rereading the letters written to her by her sister and by other friends, we can infer what she was writing them. Perhaps the Paches gave her a blanket, and so her sister Reisel, her principal correspondent, would write her, "Be sure to thank the Pache family for giving you an extra blanket." So in this way, we can learn from the letters while we don't have Sala's direct voice. Let's look at a postcard so you can just see how much we can learn just from the visual. There's a Nazi stamp, a picture, a profile of Hitler. It's a lot cheaper to print the stamp on the postcard than print stamps separately, sell them separately, and have them glued onto whatever missive is being sent. Look closely at the postmark. It's from Neusalz. It's from the 25th of August, 1942. So we're fairly into the war. Why were all of these letters sent? It was Schmelz, the director of these many labor camps, way of propaganda, sort of a public relations ploy to say to the people back in the ghetto, oh, I'm okay, look, there's mail service, or even from camp to camp, from labor camp to labor camp, and even from concentration camp to labor camps and to the residences in the ghettos. Scroll down a little and you see a purple Z. The Z is for censored in German. The censorship doesn't seem to be as much the content as a perusal that the missive is written in German. No letter would be processed through the Nazi postal service if it were not written in German. Go down a little farther and you'll see it's to Sala Garnsash on the third line. Then Grossarnia, the camp, and Kreis-Falkenberg, the area of Germany. Sala Sarah, her name was not Sarah, but yet another way of dehumanizing the Jews was for the Nazis to call all Jewish women by Sarah and all Jewish men by Israel. So if you go to the upper left of the postcard and you see the sender, it is from Reisel Sarah Garnsash, her older sister, who was her principal correspondent, and that she is in a women's labor camp in Neusalz. If you look carefully at the handwriting, you'll see that there are two very distinct handwritings. This happened frequently. Different people would pitch in words when they were writing Sala. And the vast majority of the letter, let's say the lower 2/3, is in a handwriting we've begun to recognize, which is her sister, her dear friend, her principal correspondent, Reisel. The letters were often pierced. There was a system in which the Nazis received the cards, punched holes in them, and technically, when you received a new letter, they punched it, put it into a big tablet, and when they gave it to you, you could read it and they put it back into this tablet, or if you had another letter, you could exchange it for the new one. While this one is not punched, what the ultimate question is, how did Sala save all of these when technically she had to return them to the Nazi guards? And in fact, we don't know. We know she did save them. She saved almost 300 by hiding them under her bed, passing them off to girlfriends in the camps, in the barracks, and ultimately having this pile. And interestingly, there are very few envelopes, 1 or 2 envelopes out of 300 missives. Why? Because envelopes take up too much space. And in fact, I did get to ask Sala that at the opening. And she said, why should I take up space with them when they had what was in them was the voice of these people who would keep me alive.
Let me tell you now about my mother and Alla and the story behind that picture. You saw the picture, you saw Alla and my mother looking into each other's eyes. And it took a long time before we were able to put together the whole story. But the first part of it began the very day that my mother left for the camps, October 28th, 1940. And again, this was one of the first deportations of Polish Jews into the labor camps. My mother went to the train station. She was standing there with her mother. Her other friends had left. The Nazi guards were screaming. Everyone was frightened. The train was waiting there for them. My grandmother was holding on to my mother, not wanting to let her go. And out of nowhere, this tall, well-dressed, affluent-looking woman stepped up to my grandmother, sized up the situation in an instant, and said, I'm going to the same place. Let me have her. I'll take care of her. And my grandmother let my mother go, reluctantly let my mother go into Alla's arms. It was Sala Kirchner. She took my mother to that first camp of Geppersdorf. She was like a fairy godmother, a big sister, a teacher. She taught my mother German. She said, whatever jobs there are to be done here, you volunteer. If they need a seamstress, you volunteer. They need someone in the kitchen, you volunteer. But then they were separated. Alla went back home. She was put in a ghetto with other Jews, and my mother moved around from camp to camp. And somehow, Alla always managed to find out where my mother was and to get another letter to her. Finally, in 1943, Alla's luck ran out. She was rounded up with all the Jews from Sosnowiec and the nearby city of Benjin. And what I'd like to do is to read you from her last letter to my mother. She called my mother Sarenka, the deer, because when they were together in that first camp, my mother was so graceful and so speedy in running around the camp that they called her Sarenka. So let me read you this last letter, and we're going to show it on the screen as well. July 15th, 1943. Dearest Sarenka, suddenly I'm here at the post office. The mail is going out today, and how could I not write to my Sarenka? I want to know how you are, how your health is. We are well and plan to go to the camp. Today is a gorgeous day. We are in the best of spirits and have great hopes for the future. Don't worry, girl. It will be fine. Be brave. Stay well. Warm regards. Yours, Alla. So Alla's next move, you heard how she described we are well and going to the camp. Well, she knows quite well that the camp is Auschwitz. Sosnowiec and Benjin were just barely an hour, maybe a little bit more, to Auschwitz, and the rumors had been flying for quite some time. Alla was taken to Auschwitz, and she was put to work there. She was recruited by the underground. The underground was working with some women in the munitions factory, and they were gathering gunpowder to build a bomb. Grain by grain, the women smuggled the gunpowder and passed it in an underground railroad sort of way to the Sonderkommando who were building the bombs. And on October 7th, 1944, the only armed uprising in Auschwitz took place. One of the crematoria was bombed. Quite a few Jews escaped. Most of them were recaptured. The Nazis were furious. How dare the Jews have an uprising, let alone one with a bomb? And through a very lengthy forensics process, they eventually traced the gunpowder back to Ala and her co-conspirators. And on January 5th, 1945, 3 weeks and 1 day before Auschwitz was liberated, Ala and her friends, Rosa Robata, Estusha Weiblum, Regina Saperstein, were hanged at Auschwitz. So, you know, that sort of silly game we play sometimes, if you go back in history, who would you want to meet? And people say George Washington, or I'd want to meet Marie Curie. Well, for me, it's always Ala. I would have loved to know Ala, a woman of extraordinary passion and intellect and wisdom and humor. Sala was liberated in May of 1945. She had a very long war. She was one of the first Jews taken in the war and one of the last to be liberated. It took 8 months before she found anyone else from the family who had survived. And it was her sister Reisel whom she found. Reisel had been on a death march. She was taken to Sweden, more dead than alive. And eventually she and Sala found each other. And in our Passover Seder, we always read the first letter that Reisel wrote when she discovered that my mother was alive, which is a beautiful letter of liberation. And it's a reminder that for our family, slavery is not a metaphor. So 5 years, 5 long years from slavery to liberation, after surviving the war, how did they rebuild their lives? Persistence, grit, resilience, all of those things. I hope in your comments tonight, you'll tell us something about how your family put themselves together again after the war. And I wonder if any of you had moms who were war brides, as my mother was. I would love to know your stories as well. Caroline, I hope your sound is working as Sala's granddaughter. I hope you'll tell us part of the story of Sala coming to America.
We and Sala ended up a town called Anbach. She met Americans who Sydney with Kirshner, and they met during the services at a synagogue, and the relationship took off very quickly, as things seem to do right after the war. And they were in a civil service in Ansbach, and my grandfather went back to America, and Sala followed shortly after, just on a boat, fellow war brides, and that's a picture of right after liberation, and that's when they first their engagement, and so she ended up in America. They got married again in New York, where Sala and Sydney moved in with my grandfather's mother, Jenny, and which is important for her overarching story as my grandmother. And over the course of their lives together, they lived in East Harlem, and then Jackson Heights, and then in New York, and then back in Manhattan in their later years with parents. And they were together 2 years. They had 3 kids, 8 grandchildren, 9 great-grandchildren, and a really remarkable. And when we talk about my grandmother's experience of the Holocaust, we spent time talking obviously about her experiences during the war, but she had an incredible life afterwards. And so I think it's important to just mention some other things about her as she exists in you see today. And the way that we remember her, outside of her as a historical figure, she was she made that the world would be jealous of. She was really critical, but also really defensive of her family, which is something that comes across from all of her family in the letters. You can see that they were a family that was very protective of one another. And she was just a remarkable woman who really guided a lot of our past, present, and future. And that was her family to survive. So we, as a legacy, are the people who send letters. Her family. We continue that story by sharing the story in this manner to make sure that all people who are no longer with us stay alive through these stories. Yeah, and that's my grandmother, and I'll leave it to the next person to continue the story.
So what do you do when history falls into your lap, which is really what happened to me when my mother gave me the letters when I saw them for the first time in 1991. They didn't come with any instruction manual, and I didn't have any plan at first. But I'd like now to introduce a very important person in the story of the letters, and that's my friend David Ferriero. He was the Andrew W. Mellon Director of the New York Public Libraries in 2004 when we first gave the letters to the library. And here's a picture of him with my mom. Since 2009, David has been the Archivist of the United States, where he oversees many treasures, such as the original Constitution, many other precious archives, and also oversees the presidential libraries. I asked David today to talk about what Sala's letters mean to history and to him.
Thanks, Anne, and thanks for the opportunity to tell my part of the story, and thanks for showing that picture, which is one of my favorites. That was a special event in Washington. I'm speaking to you from the National Archives flagship building on Pennsylvania Avenue. The entrance is guarded by two monumental statues representing the past and the future. And the pedestals advise all who enter or pass by, study the past, and what is past is prologue. The message is that this building contains the documentation or evidence necessary to understand our history, and more importantly, to learn from that history so as not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Great archives, libraries, and museums share a common mission as memory institutions. I remember being in New York for a meeting in the summer of 2004, just after I had been named director of the research libraries at the New York Public. Sitting next to me was Anne Kirshner, who sketched the outlines of Salas Story and promised to visit when I began my new job in September. And true to her word, she was one of the first people to welcome me to New York. And recognized the importance of Sala's collection, recognized that it had to be in a place where the public could access it and learn from it. And as a former New York Public Library employee herself, knew that this was the right place to make that happen. And I quickly recognized the contribution that this collection would make to our understanding of the darkest time in human civilization. Firsthand evidence of life in the labor camps, the crafting of postal systems, the ability to hide and protect this trove and the survival story itself, and the reveal of the spill and spell box containing so much history. By April 2005, we celebrated with Sala the donation to the Duro collection at the New York Public Library. A major exhibit was mounted there, the creation of a traveling exhibit, and the ongoing dramatization, which keeps the story alive. For me, who grew up in memory institutions, this had a special personal significance. My knowledge and understanding of the horrors of the Holocaust came early in my professional career in the libraries at MIT, where I worked closely with a librarian named Deborah Cram, a student of Elie Wiesel at Boston University, the daughter of Rabbi Israel Miller, a claims conference leader, and then married to a descendant of survivors. Debbie opened my eyes through reading and discussion, and I have to thank Debbie for instilling in me that sensitivity to the evidence and documentation so that we never forget or let others try to make us forget. Quote Elie Wiesel in his book From the Kingdom of Memory, quote, "That is my major preoccupation, memory. The kingdom of memory I want to protect. I want to protect and enrich that kingdom, glorify that kingdom and serve it," unquote. And that is what I do every day, glorify and serve the kingdom of memory. Thanks, Ann.
The kingdom of memory. We are dwelling tonight in the kingdom of memory. I was not familiar with that quote, and I think it's quite extraordinary. Thank you very much. Michael Berenbaum will be joining us later. He has a family matter that he's dealing with relating to a relative's health, and we wish his family all the best. I met Michael early on in the research for what became my book, Sala's Gift. Michael is a remarkable scholar, filmmaker, rabbi, teacher of all things relating to the Holocaust. He was one of the people who made the U.S. Holocaust Museum come to life. He was its founding director and also was instrumental in the Shoah Visual Foundation. I told him that we were taking Sala's letters to Washington and that we were planning an opening there. Jill Vexler, of course, had done the exhibition, and we were planning the program for that evening. And he said, "Would you like to have Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg at the opening of the exhibition?" And I think my heart stopped for a second because the idea was so audacious. But Michael said, no, I'm serious. I'm serious. And so the next 24 hours were sort of a blur. I sent Justice Ginsburg a copy of my book. I told her about the exhibition. We gave her the date. We dealt with her office and the civil and the Secret Service, and it was absolutely a dream come true. Now, my brother David, who worked for News 12 Cablevision, helped us to get a film crew to the opening of the exhibition, and it is because of my brother David, and it is because of Michael Berenbaum's efforts that we can play for you the recording of Justice Ginsburg opening up the exhibition in Washington, D.C.
I'm very glad to be with you this evening to celebrate the publication of Ann Kirshner's book, Sala's Gift. Salas Family was victim to the Holocaust, as mine might have been had my father at age 13 and my mother's parents not had the good luck to gain admission to the USA in the early years of the 20th century. A well-known line from Deuteronomy reads, Uvakata l'chaim. It means choose life, as did Sala, who managed to stay alive and carry on. May the memories recorded in Sala's gift and the memories of others who survived serve as constant reminders of unspeakable crimes against humanity, crimes that everyday good people the world over let happen. May Sala's gift strengthen our resolve to remain ever engaged like Sala Kirchner and her American family in the quest for democracy and respect for the human dignity of all the world's people. Thank you.
I don't think it's fair to make me talk after I've watched Justice Ginsburg embrace my mother, but I will. We're meeting online today because of the coronavirus. And so it's particularly fitting that our next guest is just recovering from COVID-19. She is Arlene Hutton, the playwright of Letters to Sala, which has now had over 130 productions in high schools, colleges, repertory theaters, and an off-Broadway production. It's a remarkable play. We're going to show you a picture of the off-Broadway cast here. You can see my mother there in green with Arlene sitting to her right. Arlene, there have been so many productions of Letters to Sala, and the casts have been so diverse and so engaged. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is the students connect with? What is it that they, in Sala's experiences, which are so different from their day-to-day life, what draws them to Sala?
Well, I always say that to tell a big story, you tell the story of one individual. And I think Sala's courage and her struggles are relatable to young people. The play goes back and forth in time. We see Sala ages 16 to 21 in Poland and Germany during the war. And we also see the play through, or the story through the eyes of teenagers in contemporary New York, Sala's granddaughters, Caroline and Elizabeth. So we see families in both the past and the present. I think young people relate to the relationship between the sisters, both Sala with her sisters Rizel and Blima, as well as in contemporary New York, the sisters Caroline and Elizabeth. Both in the past and present, we see arguments with mothers, family disagreements, but most of all, we see family love. We see generations. We see a granddaughter, a daughter, and a mother. Young Sala is trying to make sense out of chaos. And much of the play is about the letters, which is about the attempt to connect with friends and family. I think the play is even more relatable today than it was even 2 months ago, because I think we're dealing with chaos and we're dealing with people who are separated from their families. And everyone now is trying to make connections and figure out what is going on in this new world and how do we move forward. It's been a great privilege to have been involved with the play Letters to Sala, and an honor to have served Salas Story. Thank you, Anne.
Thanks so much, Arlene. We have a clip of some of the students from the Bronx High School of Science who went to the New York Public Library to see Sala's original letters. So we're going to show that clip now.
I think it's especially fortuitous to be here with you now that you've done the play, to have kind of a review and a reacquaintance with the real thing. There's nothing like the real artifact. This inanimate object has a soul. What's so extraordinary is what good condition they're in.
She had to preserve them.
Good
Sala
point.
sort of becomes an activist in her own right by keeping these letters and preserving the lives of all of these people.
Yep.
Yeah. The power of literacy.
These actors, I don't know how you guys feel, but for me, you can't truly imagine what a Jew in the Holocaust has to go through.
Being so involved in this story, it's just like an added stake, especially when you play the character. Even though you'll have to leave the character on the stage, you still carry this story with you. And looking at these letters, it's like stepping back into that world.
This is somebody who's our age, who's going into a labor camp. I think it's just the pain and then eventually the resilience is what connects to a lot of people, especially at Bronx Science.
Every time I saw it, it was emotional. because the commitment of a 16-year-old to the story of a 16-year-old is a rare thing. To put you there meant in some way, we taught you something that you would have not been able to do and understand, that there by the grace of God go any of us at that point.
My mother was a very modest woman, a very private woman. And yet I can imagine if she were here today, she'd be saying, I want to tell them something. And yet we don't have my mother's voice in the letters. But for my mother's voice, I turn you over to our last guests today, Eddie Maritz and Tim Nesler, two remarkable documentary filmmakers who have been working on Salas Story.
Hi. Well, we're really delighted to be part of this celebration or commemoration. It means a lot to us. And Tim and I are the filmmakers who have made this. I think through the program, we get a sense of who Sala was and is right now. And in showing this 5-minute clip, I think you're going to get a more tactile sense of who Sala was. She was remarkably generous, even as she was reticent. Just one other thought occurred to me today that I wanted to share with you, and that is, I think what we're doing here, in a way, is writing our own missive, our own letter to Sala. So, Tim?
Thanks, Eddie. I don't have much to add other than saying a thanks to Anne and Jill and everyone else for allowing us to be part of this event. And I think what you'll see in our 5 minutes is a story of a secret kept for half a century and then revealed, and then sort of a ripple effect of further revelations. So we're excited to show it to everyone. Thank you.
My name is Sala Kirchner.
Were you known by any other names besides Sala?
Dear Sala, dearest Sarinka.
Possibly we need to reload this.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's in our hands.
I don't think so at the moment.
Where will I move?
Neil, could you please put Anne back on? Oh, let's see.
My name is Sala Kirchner.
Were you known by any other names besides Sala?
Dear Sala, dearest Sarinka.
Beloved solution.
Sarinka.
Solution.
Sister. Sarinka.
Sala.
Sala. Dear Sala.
I wasn't feeling good. The suggestion was that I have to have a bypass. I started thinking, what do I need to do just in case I don't survive? One of the things was the lettuce.
We were sitting in my backyard and I was sitting alone at the table and she came out and brought me this box.
I said to her, this is what I was hiding this is what I have. This is something that I never discussed with you before.
Inside were 300 pieces of paper just crammed into various parts of this leather envelope. I said, "What is this?" And she said, "These are my letters from the war."
Because of the letters, the will was much stronger to survive. It sustained me. It was extremely important. Extremely important. Something to hold on to.
Dear Salu, do you know why I write so much? Because as long as you read, we are together. Kisses and greetings. Your sister, Raizo.
The entire subject of who my mother was before she was my mother was off limits. I always remember thinking you can't ask because her world as she knew it ended. And my mother picked herself up and created another world.
7 done.
Since the moment my mother gave me the letters became a companion for me. I feel this compulsion to be able to tell my mother's story. And she's my partner, sometimes my unwilling partner, in doing that.
For those letters, I would have given my life then. But that you're going to take it that far, I did not expect it. Not at all, Annie. I mean, how could I ever dream of that?
So the story's coming out of your family now and the family history. And so we're going to try to make something out of your story, all of us. So that time is a very important part of the play that we ultimately create.
I never thought I would be talking so much about these things. Never. A lot of women could never have children coming out from camps. Who knows what they fed us with? So I had a purpose. Purpose was my family.
She always made sure that I wasn't being with her out of pity. I had to tell her many times, no, I love you for being yourself.
This has to be one of the most important personal archives that have come into this library in a very, 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 very long time.
This is my past. So thank you all for thinking that that's important.
What is in the letters that helped this woman get through the war?
Die Jugend was gar nicht gerät, die Jugend was gar nicht gedenkt, aber es ist...
Wissen wir älter,
That she hid them, that she buried them, that she put them under her blouse when she was taken from camp to camp is enormously striking.
Memories are beautiful, but they're also hard to take.
It infuses the sheer existence of these crummy little yellow pieces of paper with enormous meaning.
There's 24 people in the next room that are right now rehearsing, and they can't wait to meet you.
I know my mother as a 16-year-old girl, and we're going through a storm of time together right now.
It's the hardest thing for me when I realized I have to share with the world. I cannot hide it no more. I hid them for 50 years, and they got to be told.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim and Eddie, and thank you to all of our guests, and thank you to all of you. I've seen some of your comments as we've been going through this. I'm sorry about some of the bandwidth challenges. Those of you, and I'm sure there are many of you who are working from home, I'm sure you feel our pain as the internet sometimes gets a little wobbly here, even in Manhattan. We've got some time now to take questions. I'm going to ask the team that's working with us if there are some that they can pull for us, and we will we'll stay as long as you have questions. And I'd love to know your reactions to the film or to any other parts of Sala's story. So so let's go. So this is from Harriet, second generation Shoah, refugee parents in Jackson Heights. Jackson Heights, by the way, was a new development of, had a new development of apartment buildings that had special deals for World War II vets, as my father was when he was Corporal Sidney Kirshner, meeting my mother after she was liberated. And that's how we ended up in Jackson Heights, Queens. We do share a love of archives and preserving Holocaust memory. You know, I've spoken to many people who have letters and pictures, as you do, Harriet. What's difficult for many of them is that those pictures and letters might be found after the person to whom they were most important has already died. And how do you piece that together? I was so lucky that my mother was willing, you know, her silence was over once she gave me the letters. It was like a light switch going on. I was so lucky that she was willing to share her story with me. I know there were some things she did not tell me, but I think she told me a lot. I was also able to interview many of the other correspondents. Not all of whom were alive. There were about 78 in total. There were probably about 10 or 15 who were still alive. From Sarah Newcomb, she did have a purpose. Yes, thank you for saying that, Sarah. My mother died 2 years ago. She and my dad lived with us for about almost 4 years in their last years, which was a real privilege for us. Thank you, Harriet. Kol kavod. Questions? Do we have questions? When does the film come out, and is the play in theaters now? Well, we, you know, the documentary filmmaking activities are difficult ones. Got to get distribution and raise money and finish the film. Tim and Eddie are hard at work. I don't think they've set a specific date yet, but I hope many of you will send us your email addresses. We will gather those all together so that when the film is ready, you will be the first ones to see it. The play was published a couple of years ago, and there's a database. If you go to letterstosala.com, there's a website now that was specifically done for the drama teachers all across the country who are interested in productions of Letters to Sala. I should say that none of the schools that have done the play have been Jewish schools. They are public schools. Some of them are parochial schools, Catholic schools, Lutheran schools. And I think it's part of when we think about the future of the Holocaust, how to connect to other audiences. The play is a really, really big part of that. So this gives me a chance to thank Arlene again for her tireless efforts in getting the play out. I don't know how many of my guests are still backstage, but we could certainly put some of them back up on the screen with me. And if they would like to answer questions, I'd be happy to have their company. Stacy asked if my mother ever went back to Sosnowiec. Yes. And it's sort of odd. When I started working on the letters, I knew I had to go to Sosnowiec, and I had to visit all the sites of the camps that my mother had been in. My older brother, Joey, said, well, I'll go with you. And then my younger brother, David, said, I'll go too. We didn't even ask my mother because she said she would never go back to Poland. And yet, when she heard that David and Joey and I were going to be going, she said she wanted to go too, and so did my dad. And so the 5 of us went back. We found the site of all 7 camps. We spent some time in Sosnowiec. We went into her apartment building, a four-story building in a very, very poor part of Sosnowiec. And we actually went into that one room that she lived in with as many as 8 other family members. It was an extraordinary trip. Jill is back with us as well. I've been back to Sosnowiec a couple of times since. Krakow, Sosnowiec, and Auschwitz are all within an hour, 2 hours drive. It's a remarkable part of Western Poland.
Hi, yes, I just wanted to add that in the course of putting the exhibition together and was writing the book, I met Arlene and went through with minute details the installation at the New York Public Library. And only in that moment did I realize the strong analogies between research, design, and mounting an exhibition, as well as research, design, and casting a play. It was a marvelous exchange that day with Arlene. And then much later, we were invited to do a panel called Whose Story Is It? And what was so particularly marvelous about that day is that the audience really saw the true meaning and applied nature of interdisciplinary collaboration. That each of us took this amazing woman's amazing story, and told it in our different media, our different medium, and then to exchange with the audiences with this extraordinary glimpse that different people get it differently, and that each person will walk away with his or her own meaning from the presentation. I found it just one of the great, great collaborations of my entire career. And what makes it so marvelous is a sentence that Anne just said the other day when someone asked me about museum work. And I said, well, I think the best part of museum work and our goal is to go from the specific to general. And so what Anne said is in this case, we're going from the specific to the specifics, so that the one story of Sala will resonate with all of you or each of you in so many different ways, your own Holocaust stories or your own other family stories of surviving very difficult periods, such as now, such as any of the wars or any of the difficult times. And so from the specific to many specifics is really kind of my new buzz sentence. Thank you, Anne, because it's really what we all do so well in exhibition work, in theater, in literature, and in documentary filmmaking. And you could hear it from the kids at Bronx Science, who will always take it with them. It was a very moving meeting to be with those young 16-year-olds, as was Sala 16. So thank you.
You know, we're going to take a few more questions, but perhaps you're hearing some street noise. And if you're hearing street noise, it's because it's the 7 o'clock thank you from the streets of New York City to the first responders during the coronavirus. You know, this is such a strange time in New York, but we're very grateful for all of them. Thanks to Rachel Marcus Hendry Mitchell, who is remembering meeting my mom when she first came off the boat. You know, what's the best way to share this kind of project? Question from Paula Kiger. Are you getting bad feedback from me? Paula Kiger asked, what is the best way to share this type of project with younger generations? Paula, I think what you saw with the students from Bronx Science is that having them connect with someone their age having them understand what going through difficulties is all about, having it be something that they can experience kind of in their gut, is the most powerful teaching of all. That's why I do what I do. That's why I'm so proud of the work that Arlene has done with Letters to Sala and the schools and colleges that have put it on. You know, also for the students to actually see those letters in the Bronx Science video that you saw, that's very powerful because they don't necessarily always have an opportunity to connect with, you know, what in my English professor days we would have called primary source material. Arlene, did you want to add something there?
Yes, there's a school in California that did the play, and they had the English students, the students in the English department all read the script. The students studying history all read Anne's book. And then along with, and then I think the local Jewish Community Center paid for tickets for the students. So over 1,000 students at this school were connected to the story in one way or another, either being in the production or having studied the play or the book. And it was, I think it's one thing if you read about the Holocaust, it's another thing if you play a character that experienced those things, or you go see a production. I don't think anyone who sees the production or is involved in it, or who reads Anne's book, will ever think about, you know, about other people, Jewish people, immigrants, someone who's other than they are, in the same way again. One teacher told us that in her school, they used it as a way to discuss bullying. And what's been very exciting is that a lot of the productions have had diversity in the cast, as Anne pointed out earlier. I saw a production in Jacksonville, Florida, that had in the cast as people in the camps, as Salas Family. There was an American Samoan. There was someone from China. There was a student. There were several African-American students. And the story comes through regardless of the skin color of the actors. And that's just been thrilling to see. So thanks again, Anne. And I also want to give credit to Eric Nightingale, a director who worked for us on the project for many years. And the play itself is published by Dramatist Play Service. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Arlene. Question from Leah Rosenfeld-Sills. What do you suggest that a family does with hundreds of letters? Where would you go first to see if they have any historical significance? Well, it's interesting. Plenty of people have letters that they don't know what to do with. The first step is organizing the letters, creating kind of a very simple database of when they were written, to whom they were written, where the person was, and these days, you know, taking a picture of all of them so that you can organize them in accordance with all those different factors. If they're not in English, and I assume the letters you're talking about probably are not in English, then you want to go and have them translated. Well, for me in 1991, that was a really big deal because the letters were in Polish and German and a little bit of Czech and a little bit of Russian and some Yiddish. It was very, very difficult. But that was pre-internet days. You know, when my parents moved out of their home in 2000 and I don't know, maybe 2015 or so, Caroline and I found, well, Caroline would say she found, so I'll give her credit for it. She found some letters that were hidden in the attic. They weren't hidden, but they were put away in the attic. And I thought, oh, gee, how am I going to get those translated? Well, Caroline put them up on Reddit. And those of you who know Reddit, R-E-D-D-I-T, within an hour, we had some decent translations of these letters, which were written originally in Polish. So in the digital era, in the internet era, there's a lot of resources that will be available to you to get the letters organized. Once the letters are organized, then you want to schedule a visit with an archivist. The first person who saw my mother's letters was a librarian named Zachary Baker, who was then at YIVO, and he thought they were very interesting, and he introduced me to a very famous scholar of the Holocaust, Lucian Dobrzycki, and I showed him the letters, and he was kind of an old-fashioned fellow, and he didn't think I really knew anything about them, and so he said, "Why don't you just leave them here with me? I'll take care of them." And that was my way of knowing that these letters were incredibly important. So when you go to meet an archivist, you're going to want to go with as much of the story under your belt as possible. And then you'll figure out what the story is, and it may not be that any individual letter writer was important, but that the whole story has significance. Of the 78 people who wrote to my mother, the only one who is historically significant in any objective way is Sala Kirchner, because of her role in the Auschwitz uprising. The rest of the letter writers are all precious to me as people who were precious to my family, but you wouldn't find them in the history books. So I hope that gives you some pointers about how you might go about it. Kristen Polsano asks, did your mother realize the magnitude of what she shared with the world by saving and sharing these letters? In the end, she did. The day that we gave the letters to the New York Public Library and we went walking down that grand staircase at Fifth Avenue and 42nd Street, I could see my mother, I could see it registering on my mother's face that this was really important, that this wasn't Annie's crazy project. This was something that was really important. And in my mother's final years, as performers in Arlene's wonderful play would send her letters and pictures and T-shirts saying letters to Sala, and playbills from the productions, my mother knew that she had done something wonderful for them, for the students, but also something wonderful for her, and that it was a continuation of her original goal to save the letters, which was her feeling that somehow by saving the letters, she was saving those people. And she did, for history and for us today. Janet Bernstein, it's a little compressed there. Did Sala ever revisit the letters over the decades before she gave them to you? It was very poignant at the New York Public Library when the exhibition first opened. My mother told a reporter something that she had never told me. She said to the reporter that when she first came to America, she would take the letters out quietly, secretly. She would touch them, she would look at them, she would read them, and then she would put them away. My father says that he saw the letters once and that he told her that belongs to the past. You're in America now, no need to look at those. And she put them away. So the letters, I think, were always present in her mind. And look at how deliberate she was on the day that she gave them to me. She had that all planned. She couldn't have planned what came next, but the actual giving over of that responsibility to me was something that she very much planned. And in the years after that, whenever anyone would ask her a question, she would say, "Oh, go ask Annie. She knows that story," as if she had given me that responsibility, which, in a way she had. Okay, and I think this is going to be the last question. Jeffrey Fromm. Is there a middle school curriculum around Salas Story? My son's 7th grade class has been reading a number of books about the Holocaust. The story is so important and personal. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeffrey. There are several states, New York, Florida, California, Texas, I believe, where the Holocaust is part of the curriculum. And many teachers have used Salas Story and the performance of the play and the studying of my book as part of their middle school curriculum. So the answer is yes, and I can easily put, and I know Jill would be my partner here, we can put you in touch with some of the teachers who have used it in the schools. Thank you very much for your question. I think that we're going to call it a night tonight with the most profound thanks to Jill Vexler, my co-host, to Arlene Hutton, the author of Letters to Sala, to Michael Berenbaum, with our best wishes for his family and for their health, with thanks for all of his help. To my dear friend David Ferriero for his stalwart support of this project, and to Tim Nesler and to Eddie Maritz for their hard work on the film. To my daughter Caroline, my daughter Elizabeth, my son Peter, my husband Harold, my profound thanks. To Sri and Neil, our production partners tonight. I couldn't have pulled this off without you, so I thank you very much. And most of all, I thank all of you for hanging in there with us tonight, for our way of honoring our family members and those who perished in Yom HaShoah. Thank you very much.